So Charles Spencer has finally said something, and the 4 words he reportedly used to respond to a massive Netflix pitch are now echoing through every royal watching corner of the internet. And honestly, once you understand the full context...
4 words. That is reportedly all Charles Spencer said when he read the proposal his nephew's production company sent him. 4 words, and one of the most valuable documentary pitches in modern television history was dead on arrival. To the outside world, it might have looked like aristocratic coldness, a powerful man dismissing a family member without so much as a conversation. But once you understand what was actually being asked, what Charles Spencer has been carrying for nearly 30 years, and what has been quietly building behind the scenes of the Sussex media empire, his response stops looking harsh and starts looking like the only answer a man in his position could possibly give. This is the story behind those 4 words, and it goes much deeper than a rejected pitch. What they were actually asking for. Let's start with the proposal itself, because the details matter. The project was a major documentary timed to mark the 30th anniversary of Princess Diana's death in 2027, framed as a definitive emotional tribute fronted by her own son, Prince Harry. On the surface, it sounds like exactly the kind of project that markets itself, a son honoring his mother. Netflix reportedly saw the commercial case immediately and attached a substantial budget. But to make this documentary what it needed to be, to separate it from the hundreds of Diana films already assembled from recycled public domain footage, the production required things that only one man on Earth controls. Access to Althorpe, the Spencer family estate in Northamptonshire where Diana grew up, the grounds, the lake, the island where she is buried, Diana's handwritten personal diaries, pages written for herself, never intended for publication or any audience beyond their author. Home footage that has never been publicly seen, capturing a private, unguarded version of Diana that exists nowhere outside the Spencer family archive. Without those elements, the film would be another competent retrospective built from the same archive footage every broadcaster has been working from for 3 decades. With them, it would be the definitive Diana documentary of the century. And then, there was the narrative frame, the angle that reportedly made the pitch irresistible to those selling it and catastrophic to those reading it. The documentary would draw an explicit line between Diana's conflict with the royal establishment and Meghan Markle's conflict with the same institution. Diana as the original, Meghan as the continuation, the woman who refused to be silenced and her modern successor. Diana's legacy formally transferred. Think about what Charles Spencer saw when he read that framing, what he had already been watching. Charles Spencer had not arrived at this proposal without context. He had been watching a pattern develop for years. He had seen pieces of Diana's jewelry appear on Meghan at high-profile events, the butterfly earrings, a Cartier watch, gold bracelets, each time at moments where press coverage was not merely possible but guaranteed. He had watched the 2021 Oprah interview and recognized its architecture, the sympathetic interviewer, the soft lighting, the atmosphere of secrets breaking into the open. The same emotional blueprint Diana herself had used in her 1995 Panorama interview, rebuilt for a new generation. He had watched the Netflix documentary series frame the couple's departure from royal life using Diana's tragedy as the foundational context, her death as the origin story for everything that followed. And now, at the end of that escalation, came the request for the vault itself. The diaries, the home films, the estate, the most protected pieces of Diana's private self, wanted as raw material for a streaming product built around the argument tease. A new figure had inherited her mantle. The progression, when you lay it out, is striking. It began with borrowing jewelry, it ended with requesting the archive. Each step larger than the last, each one made without consulting the man who has spent 30 years ensuring those materials remain protected. When the final withdrawal came, the largest yet, it bounced. And the bank manager, it turned out, had been watching every transaction. The wound that explains everything. To understand why Charles Spencer's silence has been so absolute and why this particular request landed the way it did, you have to go back to something most royal coverage never fully addresses. By long-standing accounts, it was Charles Spencer himself who first introduced his sister to Martin Bashir, the journalist behind the 1995 Panorama interview that the world now knows was obtained through fabricated documents, forged bank statements, and a calculated campaign designed to convince an isolated and frightened woman that everyone around her was a threat. The interview was not journalism, it was a constructed trap. And Diana's vulnerability was not incidental to the broadcast. Her vulnerability was the entire product. When the full truth about how that interview was engineered eventually came to light, it reportedly arrived for Charles Spencer with the weight of a landslide. Because whatever his intentions, however innocent his role, he had opened a door. His sister had walked through it into one of the most significant exploitations of her suffering during her lifetime. Think about what that realization does to a person. You spend your adult life believing you are your sister's protector. You stand in Westminster Abbey and tell 2 billion people watching that you will guard her sons from the very machinery that damaged her. And then you learn that the single most psychologically devastating media event of her final years walked through a door you unlocked. Everything that followed, by every account, has been shaped by that understanding. The sealed archive, the refusals year after year, decade after decade, the decision to bury Diana at Althorpe rather than surrender her resting place to institutional custody, the home footage that remains unseen, the diaries that remain unread by the public. Charles Spencer has been making certain that nothing like Panorama can happen to Diana again. Not in life, she is gone, but in death, where her image, her words, her private self can still be taken and used by those with platforms and production budgets and streaming calendars. In doing so, he has preserved something genuinely rare. There is a version of Diana the world has never consumed, a fully human, private, unguarded Diana who exists only because one man has been saying no for 30 years, and a proposal arrived asking him to hand that version over as content. Of course, he responded the way he did. The state of the Sussex media empire. To understand why this documentary mattered so urgently to the Sussex operation, we need to look honestly at where things stood in early 2026. The flagship lifestyle project, With Love Meghan, had been intended to stabilize a content partnership that was showing real strain. Instead, it became a critical disaster. The reviews across British media, from outlets predisposed to sympathy and outlets predisposed to skepticism alike, converged on the same verdict: dull, narcissistic, an exercise in extravagant presentation that failed to connect. The detail that matters most, though, is what came before. The couple's debut documentary, the one that unpacked their departure from royal life, remains one of the most watched debuts in Netflix history. That single data point explains the entire trajectory of what followed. Every subsequent Sussex project has met a progressively cooler reception. The pattern is unmistakable. The world is not particularly interested in a lifestyle brand built in California. The world is interested in royal wounds. The only Sussex content that has ever genuinely sold is proximity to the crown and to Diana. So when the brunch and jam-making economy failed to convert, the next pitch reached for the one card in the deck that has always drawn a global audience, the single royal story larger than their own exit: Diana. The documentary in this reading was not a passion project, it was a rescue flare, and the man at Althorpe tore it up. The alliance nobody was tracking. Here is the piece of this story that most coverage has either missed or buried in a single sentence. Charles Spencer reportedly did not make this decision in isolation. Prince William has been privately furious for years about the ongoing commercialization of his mother's image, but William's position comes with enormous constraints. He is the future king. Every action he takes generates institutional consequences. He cannot publicly block his own brother's media projects without producing headlines about palace censorship and family warfare. When the establishment objects, it always reads as the establishment protecting itself. But when Diana's own brother, the man who made a public vow at her funeral to protect her sons, calls a project a joke, that is not institutional control. That is family. There is no palace to blame. There is no establishment narrative to construct around it. There is only one brother telling another brother what he thinks of what is being done with their sister's memory. The one man free to say no without consequences is the one man whose no cannot be weaponized. William never had to lift a finger. Charles Spencer holds blood ties to both princes, moral standing over Diana's memory, no constitutional position whatsoever, and therefore complete freedom to speak without producing a political incident. Two guardians of the same memory, different positions, different constraints, the same wall. The letter to William. And then came a development that reframes the entire picture. Charles Spencer reportedly wrote to Prince William directly, urging the future king to publicly address the deepening rift within the family. But this was not, by any account, a plea for emotional reconciliation. It was a strategic warning. The silence cannot continue. By treating Harry with total indifference, the argument went, the royal family was leaving the Sussex operation with an unchallenged platform, allowing them to dominate the global story while traditional royal values went undefended. Sit with that for a moment. Diana's brother, the man who stood at her funeral and challenged the royal institution to their faces, is now reportedly urging the future king to push back, not against Diana's memory being protected, but against the manner in which it is being used. If you wanted one moment to measure how completely this saga has rearranged the loyalties of everyone connected to Diana, that is it. The fracture that hasn't moved. Meanwhile, the underlying family situation has not shifted. Recent reporting suggests the royal family remains open to some form of engagement with Harry, but is deeply reluctant to extend that to Meghan. The reason, by multiple accounts, comes down to a single word: trust. There is none. The royal family's deepest fear, reportedly, is not Meghan's grievances. It is her content calendar. The concern is that any private conversation conversation, any honest family exchange, any quiet moment over dinner could be filed, packaged, and turned into streaming material within 18 months. The precedent has been set clearly enough that the concern is not theoretical. Reports also suggest Harry may eventually find himself visiting the United Kingdom alone, without Meghan, without the children, if he wants any relationship with what remains of his family. William and Catherine have not spoken to the Sussexes in years. That is what this saga has produced, not a documentary. Two brothers who cannot find a road back to each other, and a man in Northamptonshire with a gate that stays locked. Both sides of the argument. Before settling on a position, both sides of this deserve a full hearing. Those who stand with Charles Spencer and Prince William argue that Diana's story has been told across thousands of hours of documentary content already, that her 30th anniversary should be a moment of private reflection rather than a premiere with a marketing strategy attached, that converting her memory into a content pipeline risks trivializing what her life and death actually meant. Harry's defenders raise a case that is also legitimate. Diana shaped both her sons. Harry carries something nobody else alive can provide, first-hand knowledge of what it was like to be her child, to accompany her to hospitals and shelters, to lose her at 15, to walk behind her coffin in front of the entire world and carry that moment for the rest of his life. Nobody can take that perspective from him. The argument that it is somehow not his story to tell has its own problems. Try standing in both places before deciding. Imagine you are William. The most painful event of your childhood is being scheduled as a content drop with a premiere date and an algorithm by your own brother's production partners. You never agreed to your grief becoming someone's quarterly deliverable. Now imagine you are Harry. You are told that your own mother's story, the woman who brought you to homeless shelters to teach you what privilege actually meant, whose death you witnessed at an age when most children are worrying about school, is somehow not yours to tell. That even your memories require someone else's approval. Both positions hurt. Both are human. Both are true at the same time. The uncomfortable reality is that this conflict may never fully resolve because it is not really about a documentary. It is about ownership, about who gets to tell a story when that story belongs, in different but equally legitimate ways, to more than one person. What Charles Spencer has actually been protecting. The villain in this story, if you're looking for one, does not live at Althorpe or in Montecito or Kensington Palace. It lives in the commercial machinery built around grief, the apparatus that looks at a mother's handwritten diaries and calculates their audience value, the industry that has spent 30 years building a business on Diana's tragedy and then seems surprised when the people closest to that tragedy want a share of the table. Charles Spencer has been fighting that machinery quietly for 3 decades. No press releases, no applause, no public credit for the documentaries that were never made, the book deals that were never signed, the access that was never granted. Diana was exploited once by a man with fabricated documents and a camera. Her brother has spent every year since making sure she is not exploited again. Not by a network, not by a production company, not by anyone with a streaming deal and a platform and a story to rescue. The vault at Althorpe stays shut, and in a media landscape built entirely on doing the opposite, that silence may be the most powerful statement anyone connected to Diana has made in 30 years. The question worth sitting with is whether it is ever right to spend Diana's legacy as currency, even by her own son. Whether grief gives someone a claim that no gatekeeper, however principled, can override. And whether the machinery that turned her life into 30 years of content is the real story that nobody has wanted to tell. Drop your thoughts in the comments. This conversation is one worth having seriously. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly deep dives into the dynamics shaping the royal family and the media empire that has grown up around it. Thank you for watching.